Konr Ness. I'm a solutions engineering manager here at Harness. And today we're going to be talking about navigating DevOps in highly regulated industries. I met today with Kaz and David. Maybe you can introduce yourself first. Kaz first.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. My name's Cos. I'm the co-founder of a new startup called Accrual, building software tools and agents for accounting firms. Before that, I was the CTO at Brex for almost 6 years, building engineering and kind of a few other functions around all money movement, spend management, corporate credit cards, banking aspects of kind of spend. And before that, spent 4.5 years at Stripe, similarly on all money movement things on the other side of kind of the transaction flow with merchants and acquirers. And I started my career at Microsoft working on Azure and Office 365, kind of building the first versions of those.
Great. Thanks, Kaz. Welcome. And David.
Yeah, my name's David Danzilio. I'm the director of platform engineering here at athenahealth. Before that, I was the director of site reliability engineering here. So I've seen sort of both sides of the equation. And I've spent most of my career in highly regulated industries. So before this, I worked for the Department of Energy. I've worked for healthcare organizations in the past. So glad to be here.
Great. Thank you both. My goal for this session is kind of dive into this topic of how do highly regulated organizations that have stringent compliance requirements, how are they able to deliver changes, velocity, innovation for their customers at scale and at speed without compromising compliance? So I really want to dig into your experiences for how you've kind of balanced the compliance versus velocity. Maybe to start off, David, I'd love to hear kind of your definition of compliance and what it means to your organization and why it's important.
Yeah, so we're a software as a service based electronic medical records provider. We have the electronic medical records of something like 230 million Americans stored in our data center, right? And so for us, that means we have to comply with, HIPAA and high trust, and we take payments, so PCI is involved. I mean, there's and a variable like alphabet soup of compliance requirements for us, from industry groups to government. And so, it's kind of table stakes for our business, right? It's the, sort of the nature of the business we're in. And, with that means, we're a little bit more conservative, but, in service to keeping our customer and the patient data safe.
Oh, right on. And Cause?
Yeah, I think for me, and having been in payments and kind of fintech, I would say compliance is probably what customers think about when they look at different companies kind of from the outside and think whether they have good practices for keeping their data secure, given the sensitivity of the data at kind of different levels. And so externally, I think broadly speaking, is there someone that's governing how companies should think about my data and what they do with it and how it's stored and secured? And I think internally, we generally look at how do we do the right things for our customers given the regulatory framework without, to your point, slowing down too much or dealing with checkbox exercises that we know don't actually achieve anything, but outdated frameworks might require you to do. And at the same time, there's a lot of new threats and kind of sensitivities that probably aren't covered anywhere, but you still want to do right by your customers.
Mm-hmm. So, Kaz, on that topic, obviously compliance is really important when we're talking about financial data, when we're talking about health data, right, David? How do you strike that balance, that balance between a developer having autonomy versus the governance that is required? Like, what do they have access to versus not have access to? How do you handle like things like separation of concerns? Love
I
to
think
hear
it depends a
what's
lot.
important to you on that topic.
Of course, I think it depends a lot on the scale of the business, to be honest. I don't think there's a single answer that fits all. If you're at a smaller company, I would expect engineers to probably have access to everything. And you're kind of trusting that everybody's doing the right things. And hopefully you have the audit and measure and kind of monitoring in place to detect if something doesn't go well, not because you don't trust those early employees and early engineers, but mostly from an external threat perspective, you want to have those pre early on, irrespective. I think as the company scales, the size of the data grows, the number of customers, the profile of those customers, I think this is where it's important to start breaking down separation of concerns and making sure that you have the right checks and balances in place, which comes at a cost to velocity. But in general, I think there are other things that typically slow companies down far more than like the engineer doesn't have access directly to production. I can probably spend an entire hour just chatting to that. And so I kind of look at the balance of, is it proportional to the stage at the company and the kind of customer profiles that they have? And is it done in a smart and efficient way that minimizes unnecessary thrash and kind of touch points?
So it's about balancing the risk profile, right? And David, you're at a much larger organization that has probably a bigger risk profile, I would say. How do you find yourself kind of striking that balance between developer pace and autonomy versus the compliance requirements?
Yeah, and Kaz is absolutely right that the balance is so like dependent on the business and even just the point in time in the business. When I was here, 5 years ago, it was very different. And so our position has really evolved on it as we've grown, both in customer and in staff, right? So I think for us, like compliance is never really going to be, it's in the name, right? It's not really going to add value for you. It's right. It's kind of like the price of doing business. So it's kind of how do you take this thing that you have to do and do it in a way that doesn't negatively impact velocity to an unacceptable degree, right? So for us, like our approach lately, as we've been kind of shifting towards a platform engineering mindset, is a walled garden, right? Autonomy, developer autonomy is great, right? And you read a lot of blog posts and a lot of people in the community who work at small startups, and they kind of dominate the conversation. But when I have one or 2 in 3 Americans health data to protect, my voice is going to pale in comparison on Reddit. So, like our conversations are very different. So autonomy for autonomy's sake just doesn't really play here. It has to be in service to the business and in service to our customers. And so in order to do that, we have to take a product perspective. Like we really have to understand our developers. We really have to understand what they want and what they need. And stay ahead of the game, right? So when something new comes down the pipeline, we have to be ready to respond. When we were talking about AI earlier, right? When AI comes into the picture, it came out of nowhere, right? And so we had to be able to respond and say, okay, well, let's take a step back. Not everybody can use whatever they want here. Let's find a solution that we can support and that's safe, that we've evaluated, right? We know where the data is going. And so, it took a couple months longer than the rest of the market, but we had to do our due diligence. So taking that kind of like walled garden approach of, narrowing the options down to, what we can support and what we trust, and allowing developers to have the autonomy within that.
So I want to explore that walled garden a little more. It sounds to me like the walled garden is standard, probably technology stack as well as best practices that has things like governance already built into it. Is that maybe you can describe a little bit more of like what the walled garden looks like to a developer?
Yeah, so like we are a Perl shop. Our biggest product is written in Perl. So you have a couple of options of languages, and when we kind of went on our initial kind of cloud journey here, we said, all right, here go, here's a company credit card, go do it. And there was that kind of like initial burst of innovation, but then we quickly realized, hey, we can't support every little programming language under the sun. And so now you get to choose from, Perl, Node, and Java. That's what we've decided we as a business can support. That's what we can secure, right? Because any technology decision we make, we have to have information security folks up on the latest, right? They have to be constantly, we have to be defensive about it. And so making these choices where, all right, took a look at this before we started going down the platform journey, we saw that we had like 20 languages in production. So there's no way we can support that. So narrowing down the options, and we focus on the 80-20 rule, right? So not everybody's going to be happy, but we focus on making, the right decision for the business.
Sure. Cos, do you guys have the similar concept of that walled garden or like a paved path or
Yeah, the
template?
golden path.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't include Perl. I miss writing Perl in college. I don't know
No
if
way. It doesn't
you've
include
probably chosen the like how do I make my life as hard as possible from that angle. I used to love writing Perl for what it's worth. I think basically I think there's two strategies that I've seen at companies. And I think, again, if you apply 80-20, I think 80% of those companies who are successful at scale kind of choose this is the way you do it, and that's it. And in many cases, you have a way of doing it, maybe you have a couple of ways of doing it, but generally that is the path. And you cannot go far from that. And it comes with some pain points because there are problems that like there's potentially a better technology that would work in a particular case, but like it's just not worth the overhead. And it's really hard for those teams or those engineers to hear that we're not going to optimize for your scenario. You're going to basically have to work around it to some extent. The other 20% is the one where you like wild west and you do you. And the company that I've seen most successful at scale doing that is probably Amazon, where basically Amazon, like back in the day, Bezos had the whole like everything is an API and each team can literally do whatever they wanted. I think the benefit that they have, because I've heard Amazon as an example from other companies trying to replicate that model, is they have AWS behind them and they kind of build that business. And it is a product that they internally wanted to use. So people weren't forced to use it, but it was so good that people used it. That gives them kind of like a common pool of technologies. And yes, you can use different programming languages, which doesn't matter if you just exposed API endpoints, but the core technology stack actually is fairly constrained to AWS. It's very rare that they go outside of that realm. And I think most companies definitionally do not have something like AWS in their kind of purview.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Many times when we're talking to organizations that are highly governed, their definition of compliance or governance is like we have this stack of rules. Like either it's coming from some external governing body that you have to adhere to, or it's like internally built, but it's a big long list of checkboxes, right? Or requirements for compliance and security and governance. What does that look like in your organization, Cos, and how do you actually implement it? Like, cause the reason I'm asking is because many times the definition of the requirement and the implementation need to be separate. But maybe how did you do that?
Yeah, I mean, in both Stripe and Brex, we ended up having a small kind of GRC governance team, people who are experts in PCI, which was obviously very relevant to us, and broadly kind of like getting compliance through in an efficient way. I think the most valuable thing that I found is most people, I think, say, "Oh, I don't want to have the kind of compliance folks because they slow me down." I don't think that's a good argument because they do have a lot of experience and kind of knowledge, and B, no matter what, if you're in a regulated industry, you will have those folks. As an engineer, you will lose that battle 10 times out of 10. What I think is useful is hiring for the right profiles of people who have the experience, but really understand the kind of like speed of how tech companies work, because a lot of folks who traditionally come from more like established industries aren't used to kind of the way startups tend to operate. And number two, that their general default is this is the spirit of it. These are the details that we need to get right. And how do I help kind of the engineering team work through that as well as possible? I think that's the secret versus every time I've seen it where it's more adversarial, where like that team needs to do X, Y, and Z. And then when they do X, Y, and Z, they can come back to me. And then the other team is like, well, Y and Z are stupid. We shouldn't do them. You end up really creating a lot of thrash and cultural debt. And so my advice for folks would be A, to some extent, embrace it. B, really influence who you hire, especially the first few folks if you're early on, and the leaders later on, because I think that's what sets the kind of like pace versus trying to just avoid the problem altogether.
Yeah. David, similar question, right? Like, what does compliance implementation look at Athena?
Yeah, so I mean, for us, the thing is, I don't want my developers talking to like our compliance teams. Like our goal is to abstract that away from
Why
them.
is that? Just because it'll turn into an argument?
Yeah, well, also we have, I don't know, 900 developers, and we would overwhelm our audit and compliance teams, right? So, just kind it's for like efficiency's sake, right? But then also, um, uh, these compliance, like if you're letting your compliance team design your controls, that's you're going to have a bunch of non-technical people designing technical solutions, right? That's not good.
Mm.
And so what we have done is, for that kind of walled garden approach, we have, a sort of a virtual architect team. So it's a bunch of architects across all the domains at athenahealth who meet and help kind of define, okay, this is going to be the new thing that we bless and invite into the walled garden. But then there's a set of architects who are experts in our compliance requirements, and so they go in and say, okay, how do we build this as a reusable module that teams don't have to think about it, right? So we build in the compliance requirements, and I don't want your average, developer fresh out of school, just joined a team, figuring out how we're going to comply with HIPAA, right? That's
Hmm.
just not nobody's going to win in that scenario.
Yeah. And so there's HIPAA compliance and PCI compliance and all the different like external bodies of compliance, but then there's also like internal quality and security, right? So governance can also include things like testing, vulnerability scanning, architectural review, things like these that can also be automated. I'm curious, David, if like when a developer is writing code, like how much of that is automated, how much of that is still, there's a need for some manual handoffs, and what's your thought process on how to like continually introduce more automation into that process?
Yeah, I mean, you have to really understand the value stream, right? You have to understand what it takes to get from like ideation into production, right? And so for us, we're kind of in a transitional state right now. I guess what you're hearing me describe is what we are doing now, right? After learning all of these lessons. And so, every team kind of does it a little bit differently on how they get from like idea to POC, but usually there's some sort of the team develops a hypothesis, they build something to test it out, and then it goes to their team's product manager, and they said, yeah, this is a great idea. We're going to take it to the next step, and then they kind of go through this process of let's talk to the architects, let's socialize this, let's really decide whether this is business value, and then we go sort of to the operational discussions of like we start talking to the SRE teams. How are we going to scale this? How are we going to manage it and all that? In each of those sort of decision points, we want to talk about like, what does this look like from a pipeline perspective? Not everybody is going to get to production. In fact, most things probably won't, right? Especially when they're in this sort of ideation phase. But once the business value has been proved out, and the team gets the sort of the thumbs up to go live, everything should be automated from commit to production, right? If there's security reviews, if there's anything like that, we want that in the tool. We want that built into the pipeline. We do want you to have to go to 7 different tools, and so that that's sort of central to our platform engineering philosophy. Is everything should happen in the pipeline.
Right on. Cause it similar at your organization, and maybe to add on to that, I'm curious how, if so, like how you measure that, and what key metrics you have or indicators that you have that things are automated versus manual, or if you're going in the right direction versus with velocity and compliance balanced.
Yeah, I think there's operational metrics that you can monitor in terms of um, obviously most companies at some scale have things tracked in some sort of like project tracking system. You can see how fast things move there. You can see things how fast to get to production. You can in like each step typically has enough measurement. You can see how long your build time takes. You can see like how like how things, once in production, things actually get to be seen by customers, because generally there's another step there. I would say, similar to my answer earlier, which is, I think the answer to this depends on the magnitude of changes. And so I say, number one, all these things that are not external compliance bodies that kind of force you to do something or push you in a certain direction, I think should come from the culture and the engineering teams that you've built. I think if you have someone from the outside telling you should be like testing your code, you probably have a very different cultural problem. And so I think that should come mostly from inwards, and thus the solutions are going to be generally much more automated and much more kind of developer friendly because they're built by developers. Number two, I think the way I thought about it at both Stripe and Brex was, what are the things that I need to make sure I get right? And what are the things that I'm fine with not going through as many reviews, not having as many checkpoints, not having as much process, because they're just either necessitate moving much, much quicker, or they just don't really matter as much. And so those could be, you can look through different axes. You can look from the axis of like, is this like a small thing or not? Like if you do a bug fix, you're probably not going to do a security review for every bug fix that you put in production. There's definitely some areas that you want to kind of go deeper and have more processes, but for most stuff, engineers are going to like find something, fix it, deploy it, and it's kind of automated. The other way to look at it is, how many customers get affected by this and what's the magnitude of effects of that. The other one could be, again, the area of the product, like things that have to deal with authentication, authorization, things around like sensitive particular parts of your database. Those are obviously like higher thresholds than things that are much smaller or more trivial in there. And so I think like anything else, my answer is generally more varied around finding the right balance such that it's proportional to the value that you're creating. If you put too much process for limited value, then I would say probably not a great use of anybody's time. And conversely, if you don't have enough process for things that are very sensitive, it's just a matter of time until you probably will get bitten by that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So I'm hearing. Oh yeah, go ahead, David. Add on.
yeah, just to add on, I think Cosmin made a really good point about culture. One of the things that we've, as we kind of sort of unwound some of that, wild west of the cloud for us, has been, how do we get, a sort of broad-based agreement across, thousands of developers across continents, on that culture, right? We have a lot of acquisitions that have brought different cultures in. It's some teams across different business units have different sort of standards. And so what's been really helpful for us, if folks are familiar with the Team Topologies book, there's a concept in there of an enablement team. So we have a pipeline enablement team. And so we use the pipeline to sort of, I want to say enforce, but that sounds a lot more top down than it really is. It's more about like, how do we integrate our sort of the consensus on culture into our pipeline, so that you get that conformity, I guess, right? And so, when we bring a team into the fold who comes from a different culture, right? Like a different engineering culture, we sit them down with the enablement team and say, okay, here's what we're asking you to do. Here are the things that we're going to ask you to change. And we're going to hold your hand and kind of use this as an opportunity to convince you and to build that into the culture. And so the discussion goes both ways. We've learned a lot from teams with different cultures and brought some of those things into the pipeline, right? So we try and have a standardized pipeline across the environment. And so it's been a really interesting mechanism for us there.
Help me understand a little bit. Just I've never heard the concept of integrating culture into a pipeline. So give me like maybe just a specific example, just so I can get a frame of reference of what you mean by that.
Yeah, so like your Cosmin example, if somebody from the outside has to tell you to test your code, then that's a culture problem, right? That's not, but there's, some teams have different standards on what a passing test looks like, or what a good test looks like, or what, so enforcing kind of what athenahealth's idea of good is, right? And kind of building that broad-based And we treat it kind of as a baseline. We try and make it achievable because some teams are going to want to go above and beyond, right? And they want to raise that and they want to have that ability to say, okay, my team is going to aim for 90%, code coverage. And so we should be able to increase it from the default. Those kinds of things really feed into your engineering culture and kind of help enforce it.
Yeah. Thoughts there, Cos? Implement everything as a pipeline, automation.
Very much. I think very much agree, and I think all these things are very intertwined. And more importantly, I think they compound over the years because decisions. Having seen companies from very early stage get to be like pretty huge businesses, you get to go back and there's that proverbial like, oh, I look back at like who's the moron who made this change, and it turns out to be 3 years ago.
Yeah.
But more importantly, you just look through all the evolution of like technical systems, processes, and you can tie it back to different organizational choices that were made or different business priorities. And the more you let things kind of like linger, generally the harder they are to change. And so I think technology and culture in any space, compliance or not, are so intertwined that I think people tend to underestimate that.
Yeah. So a couple of patterns I've heard so far in the conversations around the culture and having the right people in place that have a compliance mindset so that we can implement compliance from within instead of pushing it down from outside. One of the like common things that we're hearing in the industry, and it wouldn't be a tech conference if we didn't talk about AI, is that kind of the promise of Gen AI for developers is they can write 10x more code now, and they could get more features out. The velocity is the focus here, and kind of the problem though is if we're giving our developers a Ferrari and having them drive on a dirt road still, they're not going to be able to realize the promise of AI. So I guess I'm hearing like automate everything as much as possible, including compliance and quality and security, so that we can achieve that and not slow down our developers. I'm curious, Kaz, I'll start with you. Like, if you have any thoughts on the role of AI in this, and or if there's just like the impact of AI on compliance at your organization.
I think I look at AI's impact more from a very large kind of like technological tsunami that changes how we operate, similar to how we look at other times in history around like mobile or cloud or even internet and so on and so forth. And so they will transform pretty much any side of technology and non-technology, both around the world in kind of different levels. And so my view of this is it's always been that fighting these kind of historical trends will not be successful because technology always wins in those kind of massive cases. And so instead, I would look more of where are the best places to use given where the technology is today. Where do you think technology is going to go orders from here so that decisions that you make today age well? Because I think it's just very, very hard to predict these trends. It's very hard to predict both the timelines. Like I think if you talk to some people, they'll say AGI is end of this year, all the way to 10 years from now. And so like, I don't think anybody has really a clue, especially if you're not working directly on those things. At the same time, I think there's broad consensus that almost every industry and every kind of job will probably be changed through AI in the next few years. And again, the magnitude of it kind of varies depending on who you talk to. And so I would try to look at what are the places where I want to use technology in this specific case of like either it's compliance or infrastructure or whatnot, and B, what are the things that we should probably think about now, given where the trend is going, and how do we kind of preserve as much optionality moving forward? Because I think that it's really, again, it's technology choices that you make now, years from now, you'll have to kind of either evolve or undo. And I think those are really, really hard things to do. And so what's challenging is that you're moving through a very, very kind of fast environment that's ever changing, literally week to week. And at the same time, like you're making decisions that will probably affect your company and your business for a very long time. And so that's a hard trade-off.
David, in less than a minute, final thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, I'm focused on what it's good at right now. And one of the best uses we've seen is feeding pull requests into ChatGPT and asking for a code review. And having it just spit out a human readable list of suggestions like, hey, you might want to take a look at this. And just using it to kind of not replace humans, but augment them and help them kind of break past the things that humans are bad at, right? Like delving into a large PR that you may not have been steeped in and not have the context, using AI to gain you that context and get you up to speed quickly to be able to provide a better review. So I'm definitely focused on like, what is it good at now?
I
David
think David
Cos,
might actually be AI because he used both delved and steeped into the same sentence.
Yeah, all right, we
That
can circle back
seems,
after that.
there we
yeah,
go.
exactly.
Awesome. David Cos,
There's,
I really appreciate your time and sharing your thoughts with us today. Yeah, have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much for having us.
thank you.